Yeah. Well, my name is John, and well, yeah. I'm gonna get over to the presentation here. I've got the introductory slide there. Perennial vegetables, resilient plants for challenging times is what I've titled it. Um, yeah, I was starting to think of kind of a byline, and I was like, that kind of sums it up. I mean, uh, these plants they come back year after year, and I just I like to be able to find them every year in the same spot too. But next slide. How's that? So my name's John Holzwart. I go by Little John, and that's because my dad's name was John, my grandpa's name was John, my great grandpa's name was John. But I'm actually the fifth. But some people say I smell like number two, but that's a different story. Um, anyway, that's right. That's right. So I wear a lot of different hats, as you can see, but you can find more information about me at plantbasedservices.com. I'm going to disable my video now too. There we go. All right. Next slide, please. So I started jokingly to a few friends calling myself the hippie land baron because I have started purchasing, of some vacant lots not far from my home. So at the top of the screen, you'll see kind of there's a blue dot that's a little bit hidden. That's where my home is on Herman Court on the north side of Sheboygan. And then it's funny, that whole block is a very narrow city block. The front of my house is on Herman Court, and the back end, where my garage is and driveway, enters in off of Trimberger Court. And so I bought my house when I was 22 in 1997, and I was working at a local factory. Well, when they closed the doors in 2000, well, I was laid off in '07, and then the I transitioned into being self-employed, and after a few more changes in life, 2017, I purchased a vacant lot on Trimberger Court. You can see that's highlighted as well, and I'll show a few pictures, some highlights after I purchased that. But that was kind of the first chapter or first step in expanding my gardens and trying to focus on more of a business here in Sheboygan. Um, since I don't know the first time I've been hired. That's how I make the bulk of my income is being hired as an old time demonstrator at county fairs and state fairs. And so the first time I was ever hired at an event was 2007. And yeah, I this year I've decided after purchasing another vacant lot, and you can see that on the far right side there. It's on 11th Street. It's between Bluff Avenue and Lincoln. And I purchased that this past November, and I've decided, especially with the cost of gas and wear and tear on vehicles and things, to be driving around thousands of miles every summer. It's really not sustainable. So, yeah, that's when I decided when I came off the road this year, I was going to buy this lot and add another one to my collection, I guess. So, next slide, please. But what we're really going to be focusing on with, the pictures I'm sharing is around my house or the garden across the street on Trimmerger. Backing up just for a minute there, I am having an Earth Day work weekend. Actually, Earth Day is on Friday, but so the weekend is we're going to be breaking ground at that new property on 11th Street, and we'll be there both days, April 23rd and 24th, from noon to 5. So if anybody wants to come on in and do a little digging or hang out, I'll have some snacks and beverages and things, and maybe some chairs. But I'm going to be renting a sod cutter, and we'll be flipping the sod over and creating some berms. So, and I'll show pictures of that, which is what I've done on the Trimberger Court property. Next slide. So this is what that property looked like when it first went on the market. So you can see the date on that is 2016. It was through the Wisconsin Surplus website or whatever, and all these municipalities across the state list their all kinds of stuff there, whether it's old snowplows or mowers or whatever, and sometimes there's real estate. Well, there was a duplex on this property at one point, and then it fell into disrepair, was condemned, and bulldozed. And so after they listed it 3 separate times, the third time is when I finally put a bid in. And a lot of people ask, well, what did you buy it for, right? So the last time, the third trick, or what was the charm, right? That was with closing costs, cost me $1,200 for that property, which was a steal. And next slide, please. So the dimensions of that property are 39 wide by 121 long. And that's the same as the same footprint that my house sits on as well. Now, next slide. So here is a picture from the autumn workday, 2017, right? I had purchased it in June of 17, and this is October. And I created a Facebook event, and I had a few friends show up, and you could see the sod rolled up in the back. Here, let's see the next slide. And see, that was what we were trying to accomplish. And what I have done, it's called Hugelculture, which is kind of a spin-off from permaculture, right? Permaculture is a contraction of permanent agriculture or permanent culture. And Hugelculture was developed or pioneered by a guy in Austria named Sepp Holzer. And so Austria is kind of a similar climate. The Austrian Alps are similar to Wisconsin. So, I thought I'll give it a try, especially since with these lots, these vacant lots, I don't have any running water. So what am I going to do for irrigation or to minimize irrigation? Well, by creating these berms, right, I dig a trench, I fill it with woody biomass and branches and everything else, and then we take the sod and we flip it upside down on top of all that, and then cover it with either more compost and chips, usually, or even just a layer of compost on top of all of that, and then planting into it. And so it creates a raised bed, basically, so I don't have to bend over farther. And also that organic matter that's in there will soak up and hold water as it's breaking down. So it's going to act like a sponge next to the trees that I plant. Next slide, please. And this is basically what we're doing, and it's a variation of sheet mulching, except more on a three-dimensional plane where we're just piling it on top of this woody biomass. Next slide. So here you can see another shot from the garden there as it's coming along. All the sod has been cut. It's been flipped over on these mounds. And the trees that I planted, they're 10 feet apart. They might have been about 13 feet apart because then the rows were 10 feet apart. But that way, I was able to try to anticipate how big these trees are going to get and then space them accordingly. And it's a variety of different fruiting trees, cornelian cherries, pawpaws. I've got some sea berries, some red-fleshed pears. I don't know, a bunch of weird stuff, and that's what I try to grow is weird stuff. Adrienne is having a hard time seeing the slideshow, but let's see. Now you could see that the old fence there is still up, which I'm kind of glad about. But and a quick side note here too is you can see the south end of that property. You can see the yellow rental that's abutting that property. I approached that landlord after talking to the city. I talked to the city zoning guy and the building inspector, and I said I'd like to put my own fence up. There's a nice green treated fence that another neighbor put up. You can see it to the left and back. And I said, I'd like to do that too. Oh, well, your property is zoned residential, but there's no residence on it. So you don't have whatever proof of use or some other thing. So, in order to get any permits, you're going to have to do something special, write up a variance, or we have to do a conditional use permit. And it's going to cost $250 just to apply. And then you can come up to the Council of Wizards and see if they will bless you. And if not, then you can take your plan and go home and come back and pay us another $250 another time. So I thought, well, there's got to be a creative workaround. So I found out who owns that yellow building in back. He's a landlord. He lives in Oostburg. And I told him, I said, here's the deal. To get a permit, I got to jump through these hoops, blah, blah, blah. How about I build a fence on your side of the property, but you have to take out the permit. And I'll pay for labor and materials. And he says, I get a free fence? You bet. So we put it all on paper. We both signed and agreed to the deal there. And now I have a fence on that side. Well, just a few months later, I had talked to the neighbor where you can see on the left, you can see the corner of a white garage. Well, the neighbor on that side, I mentioned what I had done with the fence in back. And she jumped on that deal too. She actually split the cost of the fencing with me, and she was a younger woman, but so she got her dad to come and help. And so Dad and I put in the fence posts and put up the fence panels, and it was pretty fabulous. So yeah, just sometimes it takes a little bit of creativity. But all right, hopefully everybody is connected and seeing this presentation. Should we go to the next slide? All right. Why perennial vegetables? All right. And I think the number one thing for me would be it's an essential part of an integrated polyculture. And what is a polyculture? A polyculture is the opposite of a monoculture, right? When we think of a monoculture, we think of that big, vast cornfield or soybeans, right? And once it flowers, okay, pollinators may get something from the soybeans at least. I mean, corn is wind pollinated, so there's very little that the pollinators are going to get from that. But then once that's all gone, most times it's just a desert. There's very little life there. And so a polyculture is something that it's an environment that is going to have diversity, and we'll talk about that in the next slide actually, or one of the upcoming slides of a forest garden. So, but the second point here, you plant once and harvest for years or decades. I mean, asparagus can live to be 15, 20, or longer years old. The inexpensive and sustainable. I mean, if I only have to buy a plant once instead of buying a tomato plant every spring, from the place. I mean, obviously you can save your seeds and grow your own, and that's going to be cheaper. But saving money, whether you're not driving around to get more plants or whatever, so it creates habitat for wildlife and pollinators. When you have the same plants in the same spots, these other creatures know where to find them. They will come back regularly, and sometimes they even depend on them. So natural, chemical free, right? I would hope that you're not going to be spraying, some of these things, even though they might be more ornamental in nature. Some of them, there's no need to use chemicals. So now the nutrient density can really be pretty impressive, especially when we're dealing with some of these plants that are either wild plants or just a half a step away from being a wild plant. There are many unusual plants that I'll be showing you later in this presentation that are just being studied for the nutritional value, and some of the stuff is pretty surprising. So, of course, reducing the use of fossil fuels. If you're not tilling and digging and planting and running pumps for irrigation or whatever, I mean, obviously that would be on a larger scale, but you get the idea of reducing the use of fossil fuels, and supporting the biodiversity in the urban setting. right? I mean, definitely, we already have a lot of biodiversity in the city, especially compared to those big cornfields. But the more diversity we have, the more we can start to sidestep diseases. Even when planting a food forest or a forest garden, it's good to alternate and stagger and put different plants, where you wouldn't have them all next to each other, because if you plant a row of apples, one bug gets on one end and it can have a buffet all the way down. But if you go apple and then maybe a peach, or you kind of alternate, you can break up that potential cycle just by doing planting and mimicking nature. Next slide, please. All right, so a forest garden, and you've heard me use that term a few times already. This is basically like it says on the bottom, these communities of plants are intentionally placed together to optimize space, nutrient exchange, pollination, productivity, and biodiversity. So we're basically just geoengineering our own little forest right there, but it's all with plants that are going to feed us. And you can see the tall tree layer, the low tree layer. We've got a vine layer, a shrub layer, herbaceous layer. We've got ground covers, root plants, things like that. And the plants that I'm going to show you, I'm going to try to kind of work through in different layers. Let's see what the next slide is here. All right, this is just an example. Now, it's a beautiful little scene here. We've got some small fruiting trees. We've got it looks like maybe a summer kitchen, and we've got a bunch of different herbs and beautiful flowers. Many of those are edible. I see anise hyssop in there and a few other things. So next slide, please. All right. So what you planting, John? We'll start with some basics. Is this the halfway point you had mentioned, Chris?
I don't know. Do we have any questions at this point? Does anybody want to pop anything so far into our text window or hold up your hand? Again, you should be able to access the chat window and just mousing anywhere on your screen, and then in the upper right, it should pop up. Anybody have any questions?
And this obviously isn't the halfway point, because I went a little hog wild with all the different plants. There's just so many different cool plants, and some of these plants I've just started learning about in the last few years. It's really, I'm really in love with some new interesting plants. So next slide. All right, a basic one. It's asparagus. Almost everybody, when I mention a perennial vegetable, they go, perennial vegetable, and then I say, yeah, asparagus. Oh, sure, right? Yeah. Well, now, asparagus is, you're harvesting those spring shoots, obviously. Many of us maybe even have memories of harvesting wild asparagus in the ditches. But if you look at the picture on the left, you'll see we've got your typical green asparagus. You've got the white asparagus in the middle, and we've got the purple asparagus on the other side. And a lot of people wonder, how do they get white asparagus? Is that another strain, like the other two, or, whatever? Well, hit the next slide. And it's called blanching, right? And you could see these clay pots on the one picture. They call them clochets. It's a French term. And with the asparagus, they'll mound up a real sandy soil. You can see in the other picture. And that does the same thing. You're just basically starving or depriving the plant of light to create a tender, less bitter green for human consumption. Many people like to do that, especially if, for fresh salads and things. I think if you're going to be cooking it anyway, I don't know if it really matters, if you blanch it, but definitely for salads and some plants in general. And I'll the next few slides where I'll point out some things where people are blanching, and it definitely can change the flavor profile or make things more mild. Next slide. Just like rhubarb, right? Some people, they think about breaking off a stalk of rhubarb and eating it right out of the ground. Wow, the sourness of that. Well, imagine blanching it. Look at how pink and tender those rhubarb stalks are. Yeah, the flavor on those would be way more delicate. But rhubarb is another perennial vegetable. Of course, we treat it like a fruit because, with the sugar and the making pies and things, but it technically would be considered a vegetable because we're using those stems like we would celery. But a lot of different types of rhubarb. The darker red selections seem to be a little sweeter. But I've seen some rhubarb that can just get humongous. There's a selection called Mammoth, and I've seen it where it has stalks about as big as my wrist, so quite large. Next slide, please. Horseradish, another familiar perennial vegetable, right? And not everybody likes horseradish. It's like, oh, what do you do with it? You can't really, just eat it right out of the jar or spread it on toast, But, I think the best dish I ever had that with it, I wouldn't call it a dish, but I was in in Buffalo, New York area, and the most popular sandwich there is called a beef on weck. And wow, a little shaved roast beef and a horsey sauce on there. That is delicious, And the funny thing about horseradish is I like to call it an industrial dandelion because it's got this huge root. And once you dig it up, there's always little pieces that are stuck behind, and then it comes back again. So it's almost hard to get rid of it. But I found ways when I grow several plants like that are pretty tenacious. And I find if I dig out the hole and then I fill up my canning pot full of water and get that boiling. I dump boiling water in the pot, in the hole. That pretty much sterilizes everything. So, but now horseradish can be blanched also. And the tender horseradish leaves, those are eaten in salads or can be cooked as well. But on their own, they can have a little bitterness or maybe kind of have a bit of a taste that's not quite agreeable. Next slide, please. The variegated horseradish. That's pretty cute. I just got a plant in the mail. That's one other one of my pastimes is to order plants and seeds over the winter, probably like just about everyone else on this call. But yeah, the variegated horseradish is really neat, I think. And this is an example of a plant that they would call an edimental, right? An edible ornamental. And there was a man in Norway named Stephen Barstow, and I'll show you his picture later on. He's pretty active in promoting perennial vegetables. And he's the one who coined the term edimental. And I think, it's a great idea. They can be beautiful and also an edible plant. So next slide. Perennial kale. This is something that is, I've talked to people and, oh, yeah, well, I've had kale over winter. I've grown kale for 2 years. Well, I've grown kale for 4 years in the ground. And I know people who've grown perennial kale even longer than that, 5 or 6 years. The stalks do start to get a little woody, and they just fade out after that. But this would be considered perennial kale because any plant that lives 2 years or longer is considered perennial. Of course, a biennial would be a plant that only lives for 2 years and dies. Right? There are a lot of biennials out there. But now you can see the perennial kale. There's some variegation on the one plant. There can be, an edimental nature to the kale as well. But something that I think is pretty fun is, well, I've been taking cuttings, and maybe we'll show the next slide. And I've been taking kale cuttings at the end of the year, and I mulch my kale plants that are in the ground and with leaves and things. And then I take those cuttings and I stick them into this little box I put in the ground. So this is just a little chest freezer. And in the bottom of it, I've got sand and gravel, and I've got some drain holes down in the very bottom of it. And what I'll do is in that sand, I'll just dust it with a little bit of rooting hormone, and I'll stick those fresh kale cuttings in there after I've, clipped off a lot of the leaves off the bottom of the stalks. And then I'll just get it ready for, into the box. That's maybe November or possibly December, depending on, how the season goes. But when the killing cold comes, we know it. Anyway, so you can see on the far right, there's a picture with all the snow on top, and the picture with the lid open in the middle, it's all white around there because that's the moments after the other picture. It's in the snow, and it's January or something is when I took that picture, and yeah, the kale inside there is green as a shamrock, So, and in spring, usually by I try to dig it out maybe by May, because I found last year was my first year trying this, and they were already putting on vegetative growth, so I kind of gently dug my hand in there into the sand and tickled out the roots, and every one of those cuttings was rooted. So I'm passively rooting this kale over the winter time, and it's ready to get planted out in beds in spring. Next slide. So hosta, here's one that a lot of people go, what? Hosta? Well, you can see the hosta that is it's been blanched. It's on the right side there, nice and tender, straight shoots. And of course, on the left side, you can see all like hosta for sale at the Asian grocery. This is a big food plant in Asia. They love their hostas, and that's where I think in the States we just use it for an ornamental, but there are some selections of hosta out there that are quite large, and harvesting those young shoots like you would asparagus, and then boiling them or steaming them. That's how they process them, and thinking of some of these larger selections, these people have been going crazy breeding all these different hosta varieties. There's hundreds and hundreds of them. There's like American Hosta Society, I believe, and everything. Well, I've looked around a little bit, and there are hosta selections that the whole plant by itself is 7 feet across. Mrs. Wu or some other Asian selections, gigantic and whatnot. But I think I wouldn't mind trying to grow those, because I think those shoots would be nice, fat shoots ready for eating. And from my understanding, any hosta is edible. I start to wonder a little bit about some of the hybrids or the weird stuff that might be bred recently. But I mean, nature gave us a wise tool, which is our mouth and our taste buds. And if we bite something into something and we go, whoa, this tastes, so bitter that I think it might be, might give me a hard time here. Well, you want to spit it out, so spit it out, Maybe it's not for you. Not every plant is for you, but there are so many edible plants out there. Not everybody likes bananas, you know what I mean? So, but I've eaten hostas from my own yard. I've got the heirloom kind of variegated ones, and I've steamed them. They're okay. I think it's pretty mild. So yeah, if anybody else, has any interest in hostas or whatever, yeah, let me know because I think it'd be fun to have to try different types. So next slide, please. Asters, right? Who would have thought we could be eating asters? But there are some edible asters where we would just harvest the young leaves, the young shoots, in early spring. Aster scabber, that's the one flowering there. That's most common, and I believe that's from Korea. But we have one that's called large leaf aster in the States here, and I believe that's the one that's in the hand right there. Those leaves could be used as wraps, things of that nature. Yeah, and of course you could see a stir fry in the top picture there, that little bowl. In Asia, they call it, I believe it was in Korea. Korea has a big history of the going out in nature in spring and harvesting all these spring shoots. And these perennial spring vegetables, they call it sansai. And sansai is as Korean as apple pie is to America, kind of thing. And so we're starting to find out more and more of these wild plants that they've been growing or even selecting. I would imagine that they've started even selecting some of these asters to have more tender leaves or less bitter leaves and things. So I think there's a real big potential to explore different types of asters as far as green shoots and things. Even for salad greens, doesn't have to be cooked. But next slide, please. So here is one that I have seen people grow, and they don't even know that it's a perennial vegetable. It also is a wildflower, right? Rudbeckia laciniata. It's a lot of people call it sochan, but it can also be called the green-headed coneflower. When we think of rudbeckias, we might think of brown-eyed Susans. This is a cousin, but the leaves are very tender. To me, it tastes like parsley. Delicious, though. I think they're great. And as you can see in the picture on the left, there's, they do get kind of tall. That plant or those plants are just prior to flowering. And they put on a small little yellow flower. They put several yellow flowers on, like little sunflowers. And yeah, it definitely something to think about in your landscape, though. Because it does get so tall, it'll get as tall as a person. It's not something that you can always, have the right place for. But it definitely is a great addition to your salads and things. Next slide. Dandelions, yeah. A lot of people hate dandelions, of course, because they show up in your lawns. But how about some of these beautiful species here? Now, let's start on the right side. That bright pink one, that is Taraxacum lilacanum, the lilac-colored dandelion. It's from China, and it naturally grows that way. I'm not growing it, but it is beautiful. I'd love to grow it someday. Now, the one in the middle, the pink and yellow, that is Taraxacum pseudo-roseum. So it has that rosy-ish pink color, and I am growing that one. You can get seeds for that from Baker Creek, or there's a few other places that are starting to get more popular. Now, the white dandelion on the left side, that one it's kind of a mix. It has, on the bottom side of the flower, it has these little purple streaks. But then the top is more white. I'm growing a couple different selections of white dandelions. I don't know. Someday my neighbors might, if I start to see white dandelions on my neighbors' lawns, I guess I'll just have to fess up. But I'll be happy to come and remove them because I want them all growing at my place. I try to collect all the seed I can too, because I just want to keep propagating, these dandelions. They're pretty fabulous. And, it's surprising how sometimes it's actually hard to intentionally cultivate dandelions. You'd think this is a weed, and now, something happened. The little thing, the area dried out or got too much water and it died or whatever. And so, yeah, Murphy's Law, right? When you want to grow it, then it's challenging. But when you don't want to grow it, well, it's everywhere. So, but dandelion, of course, every part of it is edible. The greens are fabulous. Sautéed with bacon fat is kind of the traditional way. But the root, that's why I put that picture of all those, all my trophies there on the cement, because the dandelion root is fabulous. I will take those roots and I'll dice them up into, half-inch or 1-inch pieces, and then I'll put them on a metal pan and put it in the oven at about 450 or so, and hot and fast. I'll be roasting those pieces of dandelion and stirring them with a wooden spoon, and all of a sudden they'll go from kind of steaming off to starting to brown and caramelize. And if I let them go too long, they'll start to smoke. And then I turn off the oven, and I have this wonderful roasted dandelion. It's similar to like a roasted chicory, a chicory coffee, but the dandelion's a little sweeter. The dandelion root has a compound called inulin, which is a carbohydrate starch, and inulin is actually a prebiotic. You've heard of probiotics, but inulin feeds those probiotic bacteria, so it's good for digestion. Um, yeah, I could go on and on about dandelions, but I think you get it. There are some beautiful species of dandelions and some very unique ones out there. Next slide, please. Sunchokes or Jerusalem artichokes. I like to call them sunchokes because they're not from Jerusalem and they're not artichokes. They are actually in the sunflower family. As you can see, there are all the tubers on the roots on the right side there. Why do some people call them fartichokes, right? Because these roots do have a tendency with some people to kind of maybe expand or cause a little bit of bloating, and you can get a little tooty off of them. I've heard that can be eliminated if you ferment them, maybe if you would shred them and put them in with a kraut or something. But what I think is a really good idea, you've heard of potato flour. How about sunchoke flour? Right? I mean, you just cut them up and dry them and then powder it, and you can use it like you would potato flour. Very starchy, a lot of carbohydrates. It's a good food crop. Now you can see in the lower left, there's the sunchokes that are around that tree. Typically, sunchokes will get quite tall. I've even seen them get up to 12 feet tall, maybe taller, depending on the selection. Now, when I've looked at certain growers and nursery catalogs, oh, we've got a dwarf sunchoke. It's 6 feet tall. Well, 6 feet tall, that's not dwarf. I mean, when your average one is 12 feet tall, okay. But there is a guy, and I've got his contact info and the resources at the end of the presentation. His website is Cultivariable, and he's out in southern Washington State. And this picture on the upper left is from his propagation beds. Now, in back, you can see your typical sunchokes, and in front, those are his dwarf sunchokes. They only get 24 inches tall. And I think this is a way better option than these big, overbearing monster plants. And so I've started growing more and more of those dwarf sunchokes as well. Because, I mean, there's just more ways to grow food, whether it's with these perennial tubers or, leafy vegetables, whatever, just to have the most variety in my food forest is what I want. Now, the flowers, of course, you can see those flowers. Those are great for pollinators as well. I'm not sure if there are any edimental selections, but it's just a matter of time. More and more people seem to be gravitating towards sunchokes. So I am not growing the sunchokes from the seed, and I usually just get tubers. And now Cultivariable, they sell tubers on their website. And now also the dandelion roots, do I peel them like a carrot? No, I keep the skin on. I just brush them, maybe with a toothbrush or some other little brush to get the dirt out of there, any crevices. But yeah, I just leave the skins on. But the thing with considering sunchokes, considering them perennial, it's kind of challenging to get every last one. If you've got a patch and you dig those up, there always seems to be one little nugget or little rootlet or a little something that's left behind. And the next year, all of a sudden you look and, oh, here's another sunchoke coming up. I thought we got them all, So, yeah, they're definitely something to consider when planting your edible landscape. Next slide, please. Skirret. This is a plant that I really like. This is It was really popular during Shakespeare's time, or medieval times. It's related to parsnips and carrots, um, and I've got plants now that are they've just finished 2 years in the ground, and I'm going to be digging them up. They can just grow in a little patch. They start to get a little floppy, but as you can see in the picture on top, where the green leafy matter there, you can eat the leaves, and because it's in the carrot family. There are some members of that family that are poisonous, like hemlock and things, but this is now one of them. Now the cool part is, as it gets larger, and then flowers out, then it dies back, and you can see, like, if I were to harvest in either spring or fall, when there's more, most of those that energy is stored in the roots. You can see all those roots that are coming off of those plants. And so what I've done is, now my first skirt plant, I got it from a friend, and he was growing in his backyard. We went out there, we dug one up. He said, just take the whole thing with you. I was like, cool. So I cut off those large finger roots, right? There's very fat roots, and I cut those off and washed them, and then I cooked those up and ate them. To me, the flavor was like a cross between a parsnip and a sweet potato. It's delicious. They also have called it sugar root or crummock, but skirret is the most common. Now you can see on the left side, that is a box that I got in the mail. Actually, I ordered a whole bunch of skirret divisions. So back to the picture with all the roots, right? When you have a whole crown like that and you remove all those fatty roots, you have a lot of fine little feeder roots, and that crown, you can tease that apart. You under like running water, you can tease apart that crown, and you get all these little divisions. And that's what I've got in the box on the other side there. And I've got those. I'm putting them in a tray, just kind of healing them in. And that picture I took was just a couple weeks ago. I'm going to be planting those out at my new garden in a few weeks or so. But yeah, definitely something to think about growing. And you could just replant these little divisions. You harvest your crop and replant, and away you go. So definitely, I would encourage everybody to check it out. So, next slide. Chinese bugleweed. This is a weird one. This is also available from Cultivariable, and there are other relatives of this in the States. Lycopus is a genus of other plants, but this one, it almost seems to kind of look like a goldenrod or something. It doesn't really have that kind of flower, but just the way it grows and the leaves, the points, and it sends out these little rhizomes and runners, and they're very fleshy and starchy. And I've harvested them and eaten some myself. They're pretty good, and for a plant that'll just sit there and grow, and you can harvest it at your leisure. I think it's definitely something to add to any garden if you've got the space. Maybe it'll get about waist high. I'm not recalling what the flowers look like right now, but yeah, check it out if you can. Next slide. Black salsify. This is something that you can find in seed catalogs pretty commonly, actually. I got a big bag of seed from Johnny's, and I've seen it other places. But this is also perennial. If you don't harvest those roots, they'll just keep coming year after year. And the greens are delicious, actually. I've just walk around my yard and I'll pick some greens off of that and munch on them. They're pretty good. So thinking about that, perennial salad that you may want to, make every year, rather than having to go to the grocery store and buy a salad. It's just right there in your yard, and it just keeps coming. So black salsify. Next slide. Alliums, a lot of different alliums out there. My friend Stephen Barstow in Norway, he has, I don't know, I think he's got a collection of about 450 different species. I think there's over 1,000, but some of the, there's some really nice ones out there. Garlic chives, a lot of people are familiar with that. The nice flat leaves. I think I like garlic chives better than I like the common chives, because the common chives, you get some grass that grows up in there and it almost blends right in. Um, Now, Siberian garlic chives, the Allium nutans, that is even, larger and thicker leaves. I'm trying to get some of that growing too. So the beauty of these perennial onions is, I mean, they're always going to come back. Now, they different species will come and go throughout the year at different times. Some will let's check the next slide. The Allium trichocum on the right side there, those are wild leeks or ramps, and they grow wild all around us. But they are what would be called a spring ephemeral. So the greens will come up, then the flower spike comes up, then the leaves die back, the seed is produced, and the whole plant just dies back. Now, some of these other alliums will be flowering and leafing out later in the season. So if you've got multiple species, you'll be able to, have that wonderful garlic breath year round. But Allium victoralis is another one that has real wide leaves. I like those wide leaves, especially, for making sandwiches, right? You just put a couple of those big leaves on a sandwich, and with other whatever meats or, an egg sandwich, and there you go. It's delicious. So next slide. Turkish rocket. Yeah, here's one that I started growing several years ago. It's a perennial mustard, and it can get a little bit invasive if you don't harvest the seed heads or the flower heads. And you can see on the right side there, I've got a handful of the flower heads, and you could cook those up like little broccolis, and you'd steam them or boil them. The smaller tender leaves are good steamed or boiled as well. Um, it is a mustard, and some people really like mustard greens. So next slide. Oh man, I love this one too. This is one I started growing just a couple years ago. Uh, Patience dock. Now it's a species of rumex, which we're familiar with garden sorrel, right? This real sour. This is a cousin to that plant, or yellow dock, right? But this is patience dock. So much larger than our wild yellow dock that grows all over the place. But the leaves are fabulous, and they're very tender. I find them very tender, um, and native to Eastern Europe. It's real common for people to make, even like in Greece, they make dolmas with grape leaves, but they can make those dolmadas with this patient stock too, and wrapping a little bit of cooked beef or ground beef with rice and wrapping them up in these leaves and then baking them all in a big casserole dish together. It's a really delicious ethnic food, I guess. But hopefully, if we can start more and more people grow this, we can, also bring that to a potluck sometime. All right, next slide. Another rumex, right, would be bloody dock. This can be more common. I've seen, seeds for this many places, but it has more of that edimental nature to it with, those nice red veins. Um, you can see how it looks very similar, or it can be a cousin to the previous rumex. So, and it gets those seed heads on top. Now, these are actually in the buckwheat family. So the seed heads, if you let them ripen and turn brown, you can strip those off and then grind them like in a little coffee grinder. Mix that with a little bit of whole wheat flour, and there you go. You can make crackers, or if you really want, if you want it to rise, you'd probably have to add more flour. But being in the buckwheat family, yeah, you can use the seeds off of there. So, next slide. Sea beet. Oh man, I really really like sea beet. This is the ancestor of the modern garden beet, right? Which is Beta vulgaris. Sea beet is Beta maritima, and the leaves, if you could see those pictures, those leaves are very succulent, like um like a Swiss chard, and delicious. They will you can see the seed head there, and they'll start to spread a little bit. I actually harvested the seed head on mine, but it should come back, and this year I've mulched it with leaves. I've got a little bed in my backyard that I'm trying to do a little sea beet breeding program. One of the resources at the end of this presentation is an organization called the Experimental Farm Network, and they've got a lot of neat seeds. And I had gotten seeds for a perennial beet that another plant person was growing, and they shared with this network, and so I've got some. They called it the long-lived gnarly beet. It's like, okay, that's an attractive name there. But so I've got the sea beet, the gnarly beet. There was another relative called they were calling it perpetual spinach, and so we'll see how that works out. But all of these plants, Swiss chard is a descendant of sea beet. Sugar beets are a descendant of sea beet. Our garden beet is a descendant of the sugar beet, or I mean the sea beet. And so actually the oldest selection of garden beet is called crapaudine, and it is from France. It's a long carrot-like root, and it's dark red. And since that is the oldest, selection, I've got that planted, and I'm going to try to pollinate that back to the sea beet and see what kind of weird stuff I can get off of that with the seeds. So, the possibilities are endless, especially if, just trying to harvest for the leaves and not the roots and killing the plant, So that's kind of what my goal has been in the last few years is, I've planted these fruit trees. I want to grow more perennial greens underneath so I can just walk through with my big bowl and harvest a salad over and over and over again. So next slide. Oh, Caucasian spinach. This one it's right up at the top of my list for favorites. It produces, so it starts out as this little crown, and you can see that in the upper left, and it'll produce these multiple shoots, right? This Caucasian spinach, or Heblitzia tamnoides. Fun fact, Heblitzia is tamnoides is the only species in the genus. Yeah, there's no other species of Heblitzia, but it's related to actually it's related to beets and amaranth and things like that distantly. But so that rosette, that little crown will start to put up multiple shoots, and you can harvest those selectively. As the plant gets older and older, you can harvest more and more. Stephen Barstow says that he's got a crown that's 27 years old, and it's so strong now he can harvest all of it, and it'll come right back. And so you can see that it's vining up the side of this house here. That is, it's kind of a well-behaved vine as far as the way it grows, because it only gets about 10 or 12 feet long, and then it'll put off little flowers and real tiny little seeds. The seeds are almost like poppy seeds. They're real small. It sometimes it can get a little weedy if it starts to reseed over and over again. But to me, that's a blessing. If I find more seeds, I'm going to start planting them in more places, because the greens are so tender. It's to me it's on par with spinach, a little bit different texture, but very succulent, very mild, delicious. So yeah, grow it if you can, or if you can find seeds for it. I would encourage you to get it. So next slide.
John, one of the questions I know is, can people other than Caucasians grow it, or how did it get this name?
Yeah. So it is called Caucasian spinach because it's native to the Caucasus Mountains in Georgia. So yeah, it can handle those those cold temperatures. Stephen Barstow is in Norway. So just for example, and that's not that I'm always looking at the longitude and latitude, but so I think Sheboygan is at a 43-degree latitude crossways, right? And so Stephen Barstow is at 63 degrees latitude. He's quite a bit colder in Norway, farther north. And he's been growing, and anything he can grow, I'm figuring I can grow. And he's he's uh, he's been growing the Hugelculture. He's also found people that are growing Hugelculture even farther north into Finland and things like that. So yeah, it's really fun to see how how some of these plants can really be tested. But there's now with the advent of the internet, people are exchanging data and knowledge. And I mean, this Hugelculture plant was Stephen Barstow started growing it in the late 90s or early 2000s, and nobody was familiar with it. And all of a sudden, these permaculture people and plant people and gardening circles got a hold of it, and yeah, Hugelculture is really getting to be a trendy plant. Once people taste it, they want to grow it. It's pretty fabulous. So, yeah, this would be, yeah, thank you. So, Good King Henry looks very similar. You can see how it kind of has similar leaves, but it doesn't vine. It doesn't vine. And it's a chenopodium, so it's a cousin to the lamb's quarters. That's a common weed around here, but it comes back every year. Now, I've grown a couple selections. I've gotten seed from a few sources, and I grew one that tasted kind of had a bitterness and maybe even a soapy flavor to it. But then I've got some plants from Richter's Herbs out of Canada, and they can ship to the States. They've got the phytosanitary certificate to be able to comply with customs. And so, but the ordering from Richter's, they have a selection of Good King Henry that is mild and pretty delicious, I think. So, yeah, check it out. Next slide. Urtica, nettles. Yes, and people go, what? Nettles? Oh, man. Well, I think it's the perfect thing to plant as a border around your garden to keep the riffraff out. Don't you think, Chris?
Yes.
But, you can see kind of in the picture on the right, I've got these white barrels, right? And I've cut the top off and the bottom off, and then I put landscape fabric down in the bottom, and I fill it up full of soil. And then I planted nettles in the top of it. So I can come through and I'm keeping those nettles in check. Now you can see the picture there. That one is and the barrel is got flowers on it, and it's going to go to seed. But right after this picture, I cut them back, and I have buckets on the ground next to the barrels, and I just take all those nettle cuttings, I put them in the buckets, and then I fill it with water, or I let the rain fill it up, and it turns into this nice black fertilizer. It's a little stinky too, but oh well. The plants love it, and so yeah, I'm just kind of creating my own fertilizer right there. But the young shoots, like you can see on the left, those are ideal, nice young tender greens. You can wear gloves, but with nettles, once you cook them, you dry them, or if you pulverize them and make a pesto, that dissipates the stinging nature of it. It's an oxalic or a formic acid that's in these fine hairs on the leaves. So yeah, but once you do either of those three ways to process, yeah, you eliminate that sting. Nettles is off the charts with nutrition. And if you go online, you might be able to find some nutritional analysis and stuff. But yeah, really, really nutrient powerhouse here. Next slide. Oh yeah, some unusual ones. There's one in the white barrel I'm growing. That is the hemp leaf nettle. It yeah, it has that unique finger leaves on that nettle there. Then the one on the right side is a variegated nettle. I am not growing that, but if you see one, please let me know because I'd love to maybe dig it out or dig out a division and plant it in one of these barrels. I've got probably maybe 8 different species of nettles right now. And so yeah, it's kind of fun to compare the different types. Our area actually has 2 species of nettles out in the wild right now. So why the barrels? The barrels will keep the nettle from running and spreading because nettles send out these rhizomes and along the soil surface, just under the top layer, and yeah, they are tenacious. And side note, right in my backyard here, I've been battling nettles for years because previously it was coming up next to a compost bin, and a person I used to live with said, "Oh, they're nettles. They're so great. We love nettles." Well, yeah, but they're not behaving themselves, and so they've. Anytime I go out there, they bite me on the arm or whatever. So yeah, nettle root. Surprisingly though, nettle root is a good herbal medicine, and it's also, I mean, I've harvested the roots and dried them, and I've found herbalists who want the nettle root as well. Nettle root is used to treat enlarged prostate. So if you take a nettle root tincture, once right before bed, if you get on a routine of that I've had that already where it's helped me when and I do take nettle root once in a while now that I'm getting a little older. But before we get off in the weeds too much, let's hit the next slide. Oh, lovage. Now, this is a plant a lot of people have heard of, but then I'm surprised there are still people who haven't heard of lovage. And lovage is another one of those plants you can blanch, right? You can cover it and make it more tender. But this is like celery on steroids, right? It has a punch you in the face celery flavor. It's really strong celery, but I like it. I will take it. I can trim it up small and mix it in with a salad. Or what I usually do is I harvest the tops and I dry it, and then I just rub it through a screen and I put it in a little shaker, and I'll shake that spice onto pizza, or add it to tomato sauce or whatever I need to do. It's a great plant to have in the garden or in with your other herbs. It fits in so many different places. So next slide. So the Korean celery, Distania, is a more mild celery flavor. And it has that celery flavor, but I think especially if lovage is too much for you, this would be your plant. You could see it has those carrot-like flowers, or Queen Anne's lace type flowers. And I've got several plants in that raised bed on the right. They are, it's definitely something that I'm happy to grow it because I only found out about this plant, I don't know, 5 years ago or something. And that's the funny thing, when I think, oh, right, I know so many plants, and then there's so many more. They're always out there. There's always so many neat, new, interesting plants that people are eating or growing or whatever. And this is one of them. This is, and I had mentioned earlier, Korea has this great history of all these different plants that they've grown for perennials. So, yeah, next slide. Ligularia. Yes, Fisher's Ligularia. Now, there are plenty of ornamental ligularias out there, and I'm growing a couple of them. But this one here has very tender leaves, very large leaves. So it's another plant that would be good for making wraps. You could cut that up and add it to salads or as a cooked green as well. Pollinators love it with those flowers. So yeah, when I've heard people say, "What, Ligularia? You can eat that?" I was like, "Yeah, because there are many ornamental Ligularias." So yeah, this is a fun one. Next slide. So I put these two on the same slide because they are both the black jelly bean, black licorice, anise flavored, right? We've got the anise hyssop and the sweet Sicily. And it's funny, with black jelly beans, either you love them or you hate them, right? I meet a lot of people that don't like it, like with a passion. Oh no, gross, yuck. But me, I love it. I love that flavor of blackjack chewing gum and whatever. Give it to me, right? So these anise hyssop is a great pollinator plant. You can see all the flowers. I like to harvest the leaves and dry that for teas. And then the sweet Sicily is a little more mild compared to the anise hyssop and has those beautiful fern leaves. Sweet Sicily is more of an understory plant. It can tolerate some shade, and they both are maybe about knee high or maybe a little bit higher, depending. So great plants to have. Next slide. Lemon balm and mint. I put these two together because they're both in the mint family, right? And lemon balm, Melissa officinalis. Melissa in Latin is Latin for bee. So bees love lemon balm, and lemon balm is great in teas. Lemon balm is used in herbal medicine also. I believe it's used to treat, I don't remember if it was hypo or hyperthyroid, but it's used with treating thyroid. It's a great tea too. I like a little lemon balm and some ginger as a tea. Mints, there's so many different mints, peppermint, spearmint, things of that nature. Both of these plants can be a little bit weedy, of course. They start to spread and take over. So I like to put them in a raised bed so they kind of contained. Or sometimes I'll even sink like a whole large pot in the ground, and then I'll plant mint into that so it can, it won't start to travel. But yeah, next slide. Udo. Yeah, this is one that's pretty interesting. This is from Japan, and that's a picture of Stephen Barstow on the left, and that that he says this is his largest perennial vegetable, and you could see on the right there are some unblanched and some blanched shoots, and blanching it will make it more tender, of course, and it's a delicacy, and there are restaurants that Asian restaurants in the States that can't get this, and they will pay a top dollar for this because it's I mean you only get so many shoots, but yeah, it's an herbaceous perennial, so it'll die back and grow up every year. Yeah, I'm looking forward to tasting it at some point. I have a couple of plants, but they're small. So next slide. Szechuan pepper. Now this is one we're going to start getting into more larger plants now as we're getting in toward the end of the presentation here. And this is a small tree or a shrub, hardy to -15. So I'll be pushing the zones here, but there are a couple species of Xanthoxylum that will grow here. There is actually one species that grows out in the kettles right now, and it's called prickly ash. And it produces those little red fruits, and it has a little black seed inside, and that black seed is the pepper, right? And so these small trees will do the same thing. So now the prickly ash that's out in the kettles right now, those little fruits are so tiny, it's very tedious to pick. So I'm hoping that these will be a little bit larger, maybe the size of a pea, as compared to the size of a BB or a sesame seed. So, but yeah, now you should be able to eat the leaves on these too. Now, and I've tasted the berries of the prickly ash, and there's another Xanthoxylum that grows in Texas they call Hercules Club because of the spines. You can even see some of the thorns and spines on that close-up. The Hercules Club, I've tasted that too, and the berry will cause your mouth to go numb. Pioneers would use it as a toothache reliever, and you just rub it on a gum and things. So A lot of uses with that plant. Next slide. Yellowhorn, another small tree or shrub from Asia. You can eat the leaves, and the seeds are nutty. They're said to be almost cashew-like or maybe almond-like, but they're small. They're maybe the size of a chickpea or something. But they're supposed to be very delicious. I think you can even press them for oil. And as you can see, all the flowers on that thing, um, I mean, the pollinators are going to love it. The leaves are edible, which is why I'm adding it to the list of perennial vegetables because you can eat those leaves or add them to salads as a green. So next slide. Spice bush. Now this is native to the United States, and this is these leaves and berries. Usually the berries are used as the spice, but the leaves can be used, and the branch tips or the twigs can be used in teas. And so I'm going to add this as a perennial vegetable as well because why not? We're going to consume it. We're going to eat it in some way. And it's in that shrub layer, that small tree layer, but native to the States. There might be a few ornamental selections. I know there's one out there that there's maybe a yellow berried selection or whatever, but normally it's just a wild plant that grows as an understory shrub. Can handle full shade or partial shade, so something to consider. And when you take one of those leaves and crush it and smell it, you could tell why they call it spice bush. It has just this really wonderful aroma. So hard to describe. Next slide. Sassafras, right? Here's another one that is with edible leaves. It has those mitten type leaves or trident shaped leaves. The leaves themselves actually taste kind of lemony, but the root is what is used for making an old time beverage like root beer or kind of a sarsaparilla drink. Sarsaparilla itself is a different plant, but sassafras would be used to make a type of root beer back in the day. And now this will be a full-size tree. These can get quite large, but and not very common in Wisconsin. Michigan, yes, Michigan, lower Michigan, sassafras does grow wild, and even farther south. I was at the UW-Madison Arboretum recently, and they have a couple of small sassafras there, but they're struggling. Well, because I think Madison is just a little bit colder than we are. So yeah, if we grow it here, we might get that lake effect and be able to be a little more successful. But sassafras sends out little rhizomes and runners and things, so it's easy to keep it under control and harvest root at the same time for your own uses. Next slide. Linden or basswood, two different species of tilia. Yeah, so linden is planted all over the city of Sheboygan. The previous city forester, from my understanding, had a kind of a love affair going on with the linden tree. It's the European Tilia cordata, and you'll know when they're blooming because you'll just walk down the street and you'll smell this aroma. It's almost like jasmine. I mean, it is so sweet and delicate. And those flowers, you can harvest those, dry those, make tea. Now you see below the flowers those young tender leaves. Those are delicious. To me, they taste kind of like a green bean, like a fresh green bean, but very worthy of salad. Yeah, I like to even call it the salad tree because it's just very. I mean, just I could probably eat a whole salad of basswood leaves. But there are also, you can see now the full size tree there, they can get to be pretty good size, 40, 50 feet. But and basswood, or yeah, American basswood could get even larger. But there are dwarf selections that I've found with these ornamental nursery websites, and I've just got some plants in the mail of a couple different dwarf varieties that only get 3 feet tall, 4 feet tall, maybe 6, and that's perfect height for just cutting back, picking leaves for salads, and it's not going to get unruly and too monstrous. It might grow a little slower because it's, a natural dwarf, but one more thing we can just graze on in the landscape. Yay, Next slide. Mulberry, here's another one where you can eat the young, tender leaves. This is very common in Asian cooking. You could saute them or steam them. A lot of times they just like to steam them, and then they would pick them up with chopsticks and maybe dredge them in a little soy sauce, or hold the leaf and grab a piece of sushi and then eat it, kind of thing. But of course, with mulberry, you also get the berries, and there's as you can see from the picture there's a bunch of different types of mulberries, different types of berries. The white mulberries, those are the sweetest, believe it or not. They when I dry them, and then sometimes you can even find dried mulberries in the ethnic grocery store. Dried mulberries to me taste like little nuggets of honey. They are fabulous. Now I've dried the purple mulberries, and for some reason the sugars or whatever it is just don't seem to kind of come through. The flavors aren't really there. For me, the purple ones are always best fresh. So, next slide. Tune. Yes, the Chinese tune tree. Now, here's another weird one. I would imagine most people have not heard of this, and I hadn't heard of it until a few years ago. It is obviously from China, but this is a plant, a small tree. It can get to be quite large, but it is kept small by coppicing or pollarding. The difference would be a coppice would be like the picture in the middle. You cut it down at ground level, and you keep getting these multiple shoots. If you pollard something, you have it looking like a lollipop, in the bottom right there, where it continually makes those shoots. And so as you're doing that, you're creating these shoots. You're keeping this tree in check. And then when those tender young greens happen, like in that upper right picture there, you harvest those tender shoots. And in Asia, they like to fry those up with eggs. They call it the garlic and onions tree, or I've even heard it called the beef bouillon tree, because those leaves have this amazing savory umami type flavor it's hard to describe. But that is starting to catch on too, the Chinese tune tree. I've got several selections of that. I might be a little bit on the border of being able to grow them, kind of pushing the zones. But I overwintered the plants I have. I overwintered them in a bed outside this year, and it looks like they overwintered just fine. I mean, we did have a mild winter, granted, but I'm really hopeful that I'll be planting those in my new garden, and I'll be regularly harvesting the shoots. So next slide.
I did have one question for you, John. You'd mentioned that the two different ways of pruning these, and was it compass, or what was the first title or term?
Coppice, Coppice.
Okay,
Coppice.
thank you.
Yeah.
We'll have that for further study. Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. So, all right. Then my little catchphrase here, as we're starting to wrap it up at the end: the more you grow, the less you mow. and that's what I'm all about. Is just trying to pack in as much food as I can into my space. So next slide. Now this is the book by Stephen Barstow. I'd encourage you to check that out. You can even go to his website and order directly from him. You'll get an autographed copy, and then the money will go directly to him instead of to Amazon or whatever. But this is a fabulous book about these perennials from all around the globe. There might be some in there that we can't grow because they might be more, tropical or subtropical, but for the most part, yeah, they're all winners. So next slide. All right, sources for plants. Here we go. So, and I guess we can continue to just chat or answer questions. I mean, if anybody needs to screenshot this or has any questions about any of these nurseries, but this is a good list for most, or if not all, of these plants that I've already described. And the unfortunate part is some of these plants are in such limited supply that, they're available and then bam, they're sold out. So sometimes you got to check back again on the website, or maybe you might have to email ahead to try to reserve something. But yeah, each of these is pretty decent. So, all right.
Well, and I have unmuted people's microphones. Well, everybody except Jane. She has to yell through my microphone. But yeah, we certainly appreciate it, John. I mean, you've done an awesome job of presenting a lot of info here. And you had graciously agreed before we started to let this be recorded. So we will have this recorded and available for other grow people or friends and contacts to be able to review. So those that didn't get to see it will have that option. And I thank you so much. But any questions from the fans and audience here?
Yeah, there was, while we're waiting for questions, or if any, but while I was putting this presentation together, it was like, oh man, I could talk about this plant or that, oh no, I don't, some of them were even added at the last minute too. I was trying not to put too many plants in there, but there's just some really neat stuff out there and it's, yeah, there's a lot of potential in perennials.
Excellent. Well, I guess I don't hear any questions, but we certainly appreciate it, John, and I hope you can be involved with us as we go into this growing season. There's a lot of new ideas here, and we're going to, I guess, digest them in so many ways and see what we come up with. So thanks again.
Fabulous. Thank you. Have
Thanks
a good
a lot,
evening,
John.
everyone. All right.
Thank you very much. It was really, really great
All
to see all
right.
those plants. I'm super excited.
Awesome. All right. Take care, guys. Good night.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.